friends, welcome back to Heartscape's Urban Homestead, where we're growing gardens and growing community to be grounded, to be spacious and connected. My name's Michaela, welcome back to the kitchen. I made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about community sufficiency while chopping up a whole bunch of pears to make some fruit wine, and I asked if anybody was interested in learning more about that process of making rustic country fruit wines, and I got a few requests, so I thought I would follow up because I'm ready to make a new batch. This time, not pear, but elderflower. So I wanted to take you all along just on the first half of this process at the moment, which will be setting up the brew and then setting it to do its initial ferment for about 10 days. And then I'll show you the other half of this process when it's time. I've been experimenting with this kind of fermentation and winemaking for not very long. So as I said in my last video, this is initial experience. I am inviting you into my experiment more so than teaching you a tried and true method. However, I am following instructions that I feel pretty good about. So I just wanted to share the resources that I'm using to do this process. So the first couple of times I made wine, I was going with this book here, which is called Artisanal Small Batch Brewing, and by Amber Sheehan. And I love the recipes that she has in this book. Really interesting combinations of fruits and herbs and vegetables in unusual combinations. However, I was not crazy about the method that she used because I wasn't getting great results. Now, very likely, that was user error. She obviously has been doing this a long time and is getting great results. But I decided to just try a different method. You know, that's what you do when you're experimenting, learning something new from scratch, DIYing that learning rather than, you know, going to a particular teacher. So I got a new resource, which is called Wild Winemaking by Richard Bender. And so far, I like this method better, but truly the proof will be in the results, which I won't get to try for another, let's see, the first batches that are going are about 2 months old. So they have at least another 4 months. Some of them will be going for another year. So I'll have to let you know how this all works out. But you can come along with me for the journey. And if you're doing your own experiments with brewing of this nature, I'd love to hear about it. If you see ways that I could improve this process because of your own successes, please do share them. I love to learn right along with you. So I want to get started by just showing you the ingredients and equipment that I'm going to be using for this stage, talking a little bit about the methodology and then the recipe, and then we'll put it all together. Okay, well, let me show you what I got. So on the equipment side, we're going to be using primarily a brew bucket today. The next step later will be to transfer it to a carboy or a brewing jar right here, but we're not going to use that today. Some measuring implements, some weighing implements, a sanitizer that I've already used to sanitize everything. For now, that is all of the equipment that we need. Again, there will be different equipment for further stages of the process. So on the ingredients side, we've got our elderflower. This is elderflowers that I harvested and dried a couple years ago. They've stayed fresh in this sealed jar in a dark cabinet, so they are still fragrant. And generally, if your herbs still smell good, they're still good for using. I've got some raisins that have been soaking in water just to rehydrate them a bit. These are golden raisins that I made from my own grapes. So they actually just got processed into raisins a few days ago and they're already going to get used. I need to make a few more batches of raisins because you use about a half a pound for certain recipes. I'll talk a little bit more about when you would use those and when you wouldn't. And then we've got sugar water. So wine fermentation requires copious amounts of sugar so that the little beasties can have lots to eat to do their magic. And so we have a gallon of water. That is 1 gallon of water to 3 pounds of sugar. I'm sorry, for this recipe, 2.5 pounds of sugar. It varies from variety to variety, whether it's 2.5 to 3 pounds. And last, but certainly not least, we have the beasties themselves. We have some white wine yeast, 1 5-gram packet. 1 5-gram packet is plenty of yeast for between 1 and 5 gallons of wine. We will be brewing a 1-gallon wine today, and that's for the most part what I do. There are certain methodology considerations to keep in mind when you're brewing a bigger batch. I'm not going to go into those details today, but if I start a larger batch in the future, I'll take you along on that ride as well. Okay, so there are 2 main differences in the methodology between the first process I tried and the second process I tried. At least 2 that seem to me to be making a difference, at least in the results I am getting. Again, your results may vary, and you might get much better results from Sheehan's method than I did, but I'm just trying out everything I know to figure out what works best for me. So those 2 differences, firstly, is in the way that the fruit is processed. So in Sheehan's method, you essentially are using the juice of the fruit. So you either go through a process of juicing the fruit and then mix that with the sugar water, or you cook the fruit in the sugar water, strain out the pulp of the fruit, and then you're fermenting the sugar water with the fruit in your 1-gallon glass carboy bottle. In Bender's method, you're actually using the whole fruit, so you're not processing it first. You're just, chopping it small, maybe smashing it if it's a particularly juicy fruit, just kind of processing it, macerating it in some way so that it releases its goodness. And then you are mixing it with your sugar water, with your yeast, with raisins in certain case, and then that all goes in your brew bucket for 7 to 10 days for its initial fermentation. What he says about why he does it that way is a couple of things that make a lot of sense to me. Firstly, you've got a lot of flavonoids and a lot of compounds in the skins of the fruit, in the, just all of the different pieces of the fruit that get lost when you juice it and discard the pulp. You also just kind of have the whole fruit there. And I don't know, there's just extra magic and compounds that get mixed in when you include everything in that initial fermentation. I think there's also a benefit. I suspect this isn't described in the book, but when you, I'll show you these 2 here. So when you are using the glass carboy, let me come over here, you fill it up to nearly the neck, right about here. And so you've only got a really small surface area of oxygen at the top of the bottle. And the yeast does need some oxygen when it's beginning its initial fermentation. So you have very little oxygen for it to utilize to get itself going at the beginning. When you brew in the bucket for that first week or so, you've got much more surface area, much more oxygen in contact with the surface of the mixture and with the yeast. And I suspect, just knowing that the yeast needs oxygen to get going, I suspect that is supportive of the process. And it does also add an additional step that you have to do. You have to then stir it every day, because when you have just juice mixed with all of the liquids, it can ferment without needing to be stirred. When you've got, a pulp of fruit, basically, that has exposure to oxygen on the one side, the bottom part that's getting, rapidly turned into alcohol will stay fresh. But the top that's exposed to oxygen can develop mold. It can start to rot. And so you just need to keep it stirred so that the surface area is constantly being turned over and you avoid rotting. So just a little bit of an extra step. You do that once or twice a day during that initial ferment in the bucket. Okay, let's see. I said I was going to talk about the raisins. So the grape, the venerable grape, is essentially has all that it needs to ferment wine. We've known this a very long time. That's why grapes are the primary fruit that is used in the making of wine. It has enough sugar without needing to add additional sugar. It has enough tannins that give you that bitterness to counter the sugar flavor, which makes the end product more delicious and wonderful. You don't need to add tannins. It has other nutrients aside from sugar that the yeast needs for the yeast to be healthy. The yeast is, of course, a living organism. It has biological needs. It has nutritional needs, primarily sugar, but other nutrients that they need to be healthy and vigorous. And grapes has all of that. So when you're making wine from other types of fruit, and one of the reasons it's really beneficial to follow recipes for people who have worked through these things is that you may need to add sugar, of course, tannins, yeast nutrients, acids in some cases, just so that the chemistry of the brew gives the little beasties everything they need to do their job well. So in the case of elderflower wine, of course, the flowers themselves have 0 sugar, so you need to add all of the sugar, and they don't have the yeast nutrients. And so in cases like that, you can take some grapes in the form of raisins, rehydrate them a little bit, blend them up so that they, release all of their goodness, and include that in that initial ferment to help give the yeast everything they need. So that is what we're going to do. And the reason that I've timed this particular brew right now is because the grapes just got done on the vine. I just made the raisins, so we've got everything we need without having to go to the store. We did, however, have to go to Amazon for the yeast. Got to do what you got to do. Okay, let's put it all together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is weigh out the elderflower. So I've got a little kitchen scale here. There was a time when I would have scoffed at the idea of having a kitchen scale because I tend to be, kind of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of cook. But when you're getting into baking, when you're getting into pastries, when you're getting into fermentation, things where measurement really matters a lot to your finished product, you gotta have the right tool for the job. So I actually really love this very small, very simple kitchen scale. So we can turn that on to the ounces. We need 1 ounce of elderflower. With this scale, you can zero it out. You can put your vessel on there, zero it back out, so you're not weighing the weight of the vessel itself. And we're just gonna pour that on. Till we get to 1 ounce. There we go. Got probably 1 more batch worth of flour. And that is going to go into our brew bucket. So our raisins, I already measured out the ½ pound. They have been soaking in water. Ideally, they would soak overnight. I forgot to soak it overnight, so they've been soaking since this morning. It's been several hours. They will be fine. So these are going to actually go in the Cuisinart and get busted up a little bit before we put them in the bucket. Be right back. That ought to do it. Into the bucket with the elderflower. And our sugar water. So again, this is 1 gallon of water. I boiled it. I added 2½ pounds of sugar. I let that come to a boil again, get nice and dissolved, and then I let it cool thoroughly. We want this back down to room temperature. We don't want the temperature of the water to shock the yeast as they get reinvigorated. So we just want it to be room temperature. In we go. Give it a good stir. So with herb wines, so in this case we're using flowers. The recipe books, both of them that I've been using, have some really delightful recipes with different herb combinations. I look forward next summer to doing a basil wine and a peppermint wine. But when you've got basically lightweight, leaves instead of heavy fruit, they're going to float at the top and, not take up a lot of space inside of the bucket. And so again, that stirring process is going to be really important because most of the product is going to be exposed to air at the top. And so the potential for rotting is there. And so we want to prevent that. And then our last step is to add, of course, the beasties. So 1 full packet, again, a 5-gram packet of yeast can make 1 to 5 gallons of wine. Now, how does that work? How it works is that these little friends are going to multiply rapidly. And they're going to multiply to the degree that they are given food. So they have been given 1 gallon of sugar water. They're going to go through the majority of that within the first 7 to 10 days. And then they're going to continue working through what's left over time. If you want to make larger batches, again, up to 5 gallons, you're going to add that sugar in stages. You're not going to add it all at once. You're going to start with that 1 gallon and give it a few days to get going. Because again, this amount is appropriate for 1 gallon until it has a chance to multiply. So once it starts eating, it's going to multiply rapidly. After about 3 or 4 days, it will have gone through a good amount of the sugar, and it will be ready for more food, or it'll be ready to start winding down, depending on what you want. So at that point, you would add more sugar, another gallon of sugar water, and let it go another 3 to 4 days, and so on until you have the amount that you want, up to 5 gallons. And then if you want to go above 5 gallons, you need more beasties. Basic math, I suppose. Okay, so now all of our ingredients are in our brew bucket, and we're going to add the lid. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of carbonation created through the fermentation process, and you need to be able to allow that carbonation to escape the brew without introducing other bacteria and yeasts that are just natural in the air. And so the tool that we use for that is called an airlock. And that's this little friend right here. There are various styles of airlock. This is a 3-piece airlock. Basically, all of them allow for carbon dioxide to leave the brew by coming out through the hole, up through the body of this contraption, into the inner piece that can float inside of the water. The water layer prevents pathogens and bacteria and yeasts and whatever's from the air from entering the bucket. So it basically creates a seal that allows for a one-way vent. So once this gets going, by tomorrow morning, the bubbles will be coming out of here. This little top piece will be going up and down, up and down, up and down as the carbon dioxide releases. And when that process slows down is when I know that it's time to move on to the next stage. So it also gives you a little bit of an indication of what's happening inside there. Once this transfers to the glass carboy, I'll need a bigger plug for this hole. And I'm actually all out of those, so I'll be putting in an order for those after I film this video so that we're ready for the next step. Okay, so that is it. As you can see, it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy peasy. It's one of the many processes in the kitchen and in life in general that is simple, but also very particular. So sometimes I will say that is simple, but not necessarily easy, especially for somebody who's a little bit scatter-minded, a little bit ADHD-minded like I am, where it can be really challenging to stick with a regular schedule over time. And so doing projects like these has actually been really helpful for me in kind of helping to train my mind to pay attention to cycles, to processes that need to happen at a certain time, to be consistent with that. But because that part of the process only lasts for 7 to 10 days, it doesn't put too much pressure on me to stay consistent for a super long time. I utterly failed at sourdough bread making for this reason. You have to stay on tending that sourdough starter every day as long as you want to be making bread. I did not do well with that process. So I have found that having a 7 to 10 day window where I really need to tend to that particular process to do the same thing every day just kind of helps to build that habit and helps to expand my capacity to be consistent, which is a good thing in life. So I'll check back in with you all on this process as it moves forward, the next steps as they go. Maybe I'll give you an update on the various wines I have in the closet that are in their process, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it won't be a disaster. I've made quite a bit of it at this point, but again, I won't know if it's any good for 4 months to a year. But that's part of the adventure of it, you know? I've got the materials, I've got the curiosity, I've got the time, so I'm going to give it a go. So friends, let me know what questions you have about this process, what your experience has been with fermenting either wines or sauerkraut or any other form of fermentation. It's such a magical process. It really is an alchemy. It really is a place where actual magic exists in our daily life, and I would love to hear your experiences with it. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Yes, could you say something about alcohol? For example, what is the alcohol? What would be the expected alcohol content of this kind of a wine?
That is an excellent question. So,
where does alcohol fit into the process?
So my father is visiting with me here today, this week. He and I did a garden tour in his garden in Pennsylvania last month when I got to visit him there. He's now visiting me here. He's observing this whole process. He's grading me. He's taking notes. I'm just kidding. But he just asked a great question that I hadn't actually touched on, which is how do we tend to alcohol content? How do we know what the alcohol content is? What is the relevance of that? And so on. So I'll tell you what I know about that, which is limited. Okay, so the basic amount of alcohol that is needed inside of a ferment in order for it to be shelf stable over time is 14%. So, any alcohol that is going, again, be shelf stable, that's going to be able to last and improve with age needs to be at least minimum 14% alcohol. And then, of course, things can go quite a bit up from there. So Richard Bender claims that in his process, his brews average 18% and up, which is actually closer to the percentage of alcohol in like port wine. So relatively high amount of alcohol. And that is the reason that using this methodology, he's able to make fruit wines that are shelf stable for years and years and years, which conventional wisdom generally says is not possible. Generally, fruit wines kind of made in the home kitchen in this way tend to have a lower alcohol content and therefore not last as long, need to be used more quickly, which means that they are limited in how complex the flavor can become because, we always hear about fine aged wine, right? There's something about aging all of those compounds in that chemistry in a dark, cool place over long periods of time, years, that really develops the flavor into something complex and sophisticated. So with this method, theoretically, we will be testing this theory, we'll be achieving percentages 18% or above, and therefore this wine can be aged and therefore become more complex and more sophisticated. Now there are tools that you can use to measure the alcohol content if you want to know exactly what it is. Various forms of hydrometers, which is a piece of equipment, a gadget, a gizmo that is used to measure wine content or to alcohol content in brews, beer, wine, whatever you're doing. I actually have one. I have not used it. It confuses me. It's a lot of math. And therefore, I was real relieved when my good friend Richard Bender assured me that I don't have to use it. That this method should produce more than enough alcohol in the brew in order for it to be shelf stable, that can be tested through my own senses. And again, it's an experiment. We'll see. If it seems at a certain point like I'm unsure about alcohol levels, I will attempt to use the hydrometer. You have to use it at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the brewing. So it's just another step you have to remember along the way. Again, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But that is the response there. Great question. If any of y'all have any other questions, again, experiences with your own brewing, please do share them. Let us make this a space of learning together. And I'll see you at the next stage of this process. And so until the next video, as you go through your own kitchen journeys, I hope you are deeply provisioned for those processes. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, I love you. Goodbye.